I watched my daughter dump my mother's china into a garbage bag and say the words that would change everything. "This is our house now, Mom. You're just a guest here." Her voice was sharp, final, like she was addressing a servant rather than the woman who'd raised her. I stood in the doorway of what used to be my sewing room, my hands still clutching the photo album I'd been looking through, and something inside me went very quiet and very cold. The morning had started ordinarily enough. I'd made coffee in the kitchen of the lakeside house my husband Tom and I had built 32 years ago, back when our daughter Rebecca was just learning to walk. The October light came through the windows the way it always did, turning the water beyond the deck into liquid gold. I'd lived in this house through Rebecca's childhood, through Tom's illness and death 3 years ago, through the long process of learning to be alone. The house knew me, every creak in the floorboards, every draft from the north-facing windows, every spot where the afternoon sun pooled on the hardwood floors. Rebecca and her husband Todd had moved in 6 months ago. "Just temporarily," she'd said. "Just until we get back on our feet." Todd had lost his job, they'd lost their condo, and I'd said yes, because that's what mothers do. I'd cleared out the guest room, made space in the garage for their things, adjusted my routines to accommodate theirs. It was my house, but I told myself it was temporary. I told myself a lot of things that turned out not to be true. The changes had been gradual at first. Rebecca rearranging the living room furniture because it flows better this way. Todd taking over the garage for his home gym equipment. My request to keep certain routines met with eye rolls and sighs. "Mom, you have to be more flexible," Rebecca would say. "This is hard for us too." But this morning was different. I'd come downstairs to find Rebecca systematically going through the china cabinet, the one that had belonged to my mother, wrapping pieces in newspaper and putting them in boxes labeled donation. When I'd asked what she was doing, she'd looked at me like I was being unreasonable. "We need to modernize," she'd said. "All this old stuff, it's just clutter. Todd and I are thinking of making some changes around here." That's when I'd mentioned, quietly, that it was still my house. That's when her face had changed. That's when she'd grabbed my mother's teacup, the one with the tiny violets painted on the rim, and dropped it into a garbage bag with enough force that I heard it crack. "This is our house now, Mom. You're just a guest here." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply turned and walked upstairs to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed I'd shared with Tom for 28 years. My hands were shaking, but my mind was perfectly clear. I picked up my phone and made a call I'd been putting off for 3 months. "James? This is Ellie Morrison. I'd like to schedule that appointment we discussed." "Yes." Tomorrow would be fine. James Kowalski had been our family lawyer since before Rebecca was born. He'd handled Tom's will, our estate planning, everything. 3 months ago, he'd called to check in, asked how I was managing with Rebecca and Todd in the house. There'd been something in his voice, a careful concern that made me think he knew more than he was saying. He'd mentioned, casually, that if I ever wanted to review my will or make any changes to the property deed, I should let him know. At the time, I'd thanked him and changed the subject. Now, I understood what he'd been trying to tell me. The next morning, I drove to James's office in town while Rebecca and Todd were still sleeping. The November air was crisp, and the lake looked gray and choppy under a clouded sky. I parked in front of the brick building where James had practiced law for 40 years, and I walked in with my purse and a folder of documents. James looked at me over his reading glasses, his expression kind but not pitying. That's what I appreciated about James. He never made you feel foolish for the situation you found yourself in. "Tell me what's going on, Ellie," he said. I told him. Not dramatically, not with tears, just the facts. How the temporary arrangement had become permanent in my daughter's mind. How I'd become a guest in my own home. How this morning's incident with the china had made me realize something had to change. "The house is in my name," I said. "Tom left everything to me. I want to know what my options are." James nodded slowly. "You have several options. You could ask them to leave, though that might be difficult if Rebecca contests it. You could sell the house, but that takes time. Or, he paused, tapping his pen on his desk, you could transfer ownership to someone else. Someone you trust? My granddaughter, I said immediately. Sarah? Sarah was Rebecca's daughter from her first marriage, 23 years old, working as a teacher in Minneapolis. She'd always been close to me, visited regularly even after her mother married Todd. She was the one who'd called me last month after Rebecca had snapped at me about buying the wrong kind of bread. Grandma, are you okay there? She'd asked. Mom's been different lately. If you ever need anything, I'm here. James made notes. That's a significant gift. There are tax implications, legal procedures. But yes, it can be done. The question is, do you want to do this quietly, or do you want to inform Rebecca first? I thought about my daughter's face as she dropped my mother's teacup into the garbage. I thought about how she'd started calling it our house instead of your house. I thought about the way Todd had looked at me yesterday when I'd asked if they could keep their music down after 10 p.m. Like I was an inconvenience. Like I was in the way. Quietly, I said. I'll tell her when it's done. The process took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of paperwork, notary appointments, title transfers, all conducted during my trips to run errands or meet a friend for coffee. James was efficient and discreet. Sarah was stunned when I first told her my plan, tried to argue, but I was firm. This house should stay in the family, I told her during a phone call I took from my car, parked at the grocery store. But it needs to be with someone who understands what it means, who won't treat it like something to be modernized or sold or stripped down for parts. You've always loved this place, you understand. But Grandma, where will you go? I'd already thought of that. My friend Patricia, widowed like me, had been trying to convince me for months to move into the senior living community where she'd recently relocated. It's not a nursing home, she kept saying. It's independent living, beautiful apartments, community spaces, activities if you want them, privacy if you don't. And Ellie, the freedom, no yard work, no maintenance, no property taxes, just living. I'd toured it twice while Rebecca thought I was at book club. The apartments were smaller than my house, yes, but they were bright and modern and manageable. There was a view of a different lake. There was a library. There were people my age who were still vital, still engaged with life. I'd put down a deposit and signed a lease. My move-in date was December 1st. During those 6 weeks, life at home continued its strange new normal. Rebecca had taken over my sewing room completely, turning it into what she called a meditation space. Todd had started talking about finishing the basement. They spoke about their plans for the house in front of me as if I wasn't there. Once, I heard Rebecca on the phone with a friend. It's so much easier now that Mom's finally accepting the situation. She's being much more agreeable. I smiled and said nothing. I helped with dinner. I kept my routines small and unobtrusive. I packed my important things slowly, carefully, in boxes I labeled donation and stored in my bedroom closet. My mother's china, what was left of it, my photo albums, Tom's watch, the quilt his mother had made, the things that mattered. Sarah came to visit on Thanksgiving. Rebecca had insisted on hosting, had taken over the kitchen where I'd cooked 40 years of holiday meals. I watched my daughter command the space, rearrange my serving platters, use my grandmother's silver without asking. Sarah caught my eye across the table and squeezed my hand under it. After dinner, while Rebecca and Todd were watching football in the living room, Sarah and I took a walk down to the lake. The November air was bitter cold, the water dark and restless. Are you sure about this, Grandma? She asked me. I've never been more sure of anything, I told her. The papers are all signed. On December 1st, this house becomes yours. You can do whatever you want with it, rent it out, sell it, live in it yourself. But it won't be Rebecca's. And it won't be something I have to watch her slowly take from me. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "What do you want me to do? I want you to wait until I'm settled in my new place. Then I want you to come here with the deed and tell your mother the truth. I'll have already moved out by then. I'll already be gone. She's going to be furious." "Yes," I said. "She is." The week before Thanksgiving, Rebecca had mentioned, casually, that she and Todd were thinking of painting the exterior of the house. Something more contemporary, she'd said. Maybe a nice gray instead of this cream color. The cream color Tom and I had chosen together. The cream color we'd repainted every 5 years, standing on ladders together, laughing when we got more paint on ourselves than on the house. I'd just nodded and said it was an interesting idea. November 30th was a Wednesday. I woke up early, before sunrise, and made my coffee for the last time in the kitchen I'd cooked in for 3 decades. I watched the sun come up over the lake, painting the water pink and gold. I said goodbye to the house in my mind, room by room. The living room where Rebecca had taken her first steps. The kitchen where Tom and I had danced on our anniversary. The bedroom where I'd held him as he died. The deck where we'd watched countless sunsets. I'd hired movers. They came at 8 a.m. while Rebecca and Todd were still sleeping. Professional, quiet, efficient. The boxes I'd packed went into their truck piece by piece. My furniture, what I was taking, followed. By 10 a.m., my bedroom was empty. By 11, my car was loaded with the final personal items. I left a note on the kitchen counter, under the salt shaker. Simple, brief. "I've moved to a new place. I'll call you when I'm settled. Mom." I didn't say goodbye to the house out loud. I just locked the front door with my key one last time, left it on top of the note, and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I could see the lake one final time, and then it was gone. Patricia was waiting for me at my new apartment with champagne and sandwiches. The apartment was on the 3rd floor, with a balcony overlooking a courtyard garden. Smaller than my house, yes, but it was mine. In a way, the house had stopped being mine 6 months ago. The movers brought my boxes up. I unpacked my mother's china and put it in the kitchen cabinet. I hung Tom's photograph on the wall. I made the bed with the quilt his mother had made. That evening, my phone rang. Rebecca. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. Again. By the 5th call, I answered. "Mom, where are you? Your note didn't say. Where did you go? And why are all your things gone?" "I moved," I said calmly. "I found a place that suits me better." "What? You can't just move. We live there. We need to discuss this. You can't just leave your own house." "Actually," I said, "I can." And I did. "But Mom, this is insane. Come back. We need to talk about this. You're being completely irrational." "I'm being perfectly rational, Rebecca. I'll send you my new address once I'm settled. Right now, I need to finish unpacking." I hung up. She called back immediately. I turned my phone off. I waited until December 15th, 2 weeks after I'd moved out. Long enough for me to settle in, to get my routines established, to feel solid in this new space. Long enough for Rebecca to have called James's office multiple times, demanding to know what was going on, only to be told that he couldn't discuss client matters. Long enough for the panic to set in. That's when Sarah drove to the house. I wasn't there, of course. I was in my new apartment, drinking tea and reading a book. But Sarah called me afterward and told me everything. She'd knocked on the door at 2 p.m. Rebecca had answered, looking harried. "Sarah? What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you and Todd," Sarah had said. "It's about Grandma's house." They'd sat down in the living room, my living room that wasn't mine anymore. Sarah had pulled out the deed, the official transfer documents, all notarized and recorded with the county. She'd slid them across the coffee table. "As of December 1st, this house belongs to me," Sarah had said. "Grandma transferred ownership to me. She signed everything over. It's legal and binding. The house is mine." Sarah said Rebecca's face had gone white, then red. "That's impossible. She can't do that. This is our house. We live here. She can't just give it away." "She can, and she did. I have the paperwork right here. You can call the lawyer if you don't believe me. You can call the county recorder. But the facts are the facts. This is my house now. Todd had started to argue, to bluster about tenant rights and legalities. Sarah had cut him off. You're not tenants. You never signed a lease. You never paid rent. You've been living here as guests of my grandmother, and she's withdrawn that invitation. I'm giving you 30 days to move out. That's more than generous. After that, I'll begin eviction proceedings if necessary. Rebecca had started crying. Not sad tears, Sarah said. Angry tears. How could she do this? After everything we've done for her, after we moved in to help her. She was so lonely after Dad died. We were doing her a favor. Sarah told me she'd stayed calm. You can be angry if you want, but you need to start packing. 30 days. That's all you have. She left them there, in the house that was no longer theirs, and drove back to Minneapolis. On her way, she stopped at my new apartment. We sat on my little balcony, wrapped in blankets against the December cold, and she told me everything. How do you feel? She asked me. I thought about it. I thought about Rebecca's tears, about the shock on Todd's face. I thought about the house I'd left behind, the life I'd left behind. I thought about my mother's china, safe now in my new kitchen. I thought about the freedom of this smaller space, this simpler life. I feel at peace, I told her. For the first time in 6 months, I feel at peace. Rebecca called me that night, I answered. She was calmer now, but there was still anger underneath. Mom, I can't believe you did this. Just gave away the house. Our house. You didn't even talk to us. I tried to talk to you, I said quietly. I tried for months, but you weren't interested in listening. You were interested in taking. That's not fair. We were living there. We had a right to, you had a right to my generosity, which you mistook for weakness. You had a right to my hospitality, which you mistook for surrender. But you never had a right to my house, Rebecca. That was always mine to do with as I chose, and I chose to give it to someone who would value it. There was a long silence. Then she said, her voice small and hurt, Don't I matter to you anymore? That's when my heart broke a little, because underneath the anger and the entitlement, she was still my daughter, still the little girl I'd rocked to sleep, whose skin knees I'd bandaged, whose first heartbreak I'd soothed. You matter enormously, I said. You always will. But mattering doesn't mean you get to take whatever you want from me. It doesn't mean I have to give up who I am to make room for who you think I should be. I'm your mother, Rebecca, but I'm also Ellie. And Ellie needs space to breathe. She was crying now, real tears. I don't know how to fix this. You don't have to fix it right now. You just have to accept it. Find a place to live. Build your life. And when you're ready, when you can see me as a person and not just as someone who's supposed to give you things, we can try again. We didn't talk for a month after that. Rebecca and Todd moved out of the house by January 15th, 5 days before Sarah's deadline. They found an apartment in the city, a place they could actually afford. Todd got a new job. Rebecca went back to school for a degree she'd always talked about but never pursued. Sarah decided to keep the house but rent it out. She found good tenants, a young family with 2 kids who loved the lake. She visits sometimes, checks on the property, makes sure it's being cared for. She offered to let me stay there whenever I wanted, but I always say no. That chapter of my life is over. I saw Rebecca again in March. We met for lunch at a cafe halfway between our 2 homes. She looked different, thinner, tired, but also somehow clearer. Less frantic. We talked about small things at first. The weather, her classes, my new book club. Then she said, I'm sorry, Mom, for how I treated you, for thinking the house was mine just because I lived there, for forgetting that you were a person with needs and feelings and boundaries. I reached across the table and took her hand. I'm sorry, too, for not saying something sooner, for letting it get so bad before I acted, for the way I handled it. No, she said. You handled it the only way you could. The way I would have listened to. I'm just sorry it took that for me to wake up. We're rebuilding now, slowly. We have dinner once a month. We talk on the phone every week. The conversations are real now, not performative. She asks how I am and actually listens to the answer. I ask about her life and she tells me the truth, not just the highlights. I like my apartment. I like the freedom of it, the simplicity. I've made friends here. Patricia and I take watercolor classes on Tuesdays. There's a gentleman named Frank who sits with me sometimes at dinner, and we talk about books and birds and the lives we've lived. It's not romance, just companionship, but it's nice. Sometimes I drive past the old house. I see the young family's toys in the yard, their car in the driveway. I see the lights on in the kitchen in the evenings. The house is being lived in, loved, filled with the sounds of children and life. That makes me happy. I think about that morning when Rebecca dropped my mother's teacup in the garbage and told me I was just a guest. I think about how small I felt in that moment, how erased, but I also think about how that moment crystallized something for me, how it showed me that I still had power, still had choices, still had the ability to shape my own life. I didn't need to scream or fight. I didn't need to argue or plead or try to make her understand. I just needed to act. Quietly, methodically, with clarity and purpose. That's a kind of strength too. Maybe the truest kind. The lake outside my balcony is different from the one I used to watch every morning. Smaller, more contained. But it's beautiful in its own way. And it's mine to watch for, exactly as long as I want it to be. No more, no less. That's all anyone can ask for, really. The freedom to choose, and the courage to choose well.